This is gonna be a long video, I can already tell. Hi guys, it's Mackenzie. Welcome back to my channel where we talk about all things personal finance, talk about some faith, talk about some lifestyle things. Today's a big day. Today we are talking about my financial journey, and I really wanted to talk about this specifically because I think that'll help people kind of understand in future videos when I'm doing budget with me's and things like that, just a little bit about my background and where I'm coming from when I make certain decisions for myself or just my overall outlook on things. And so I just thought it would be fun to do a little backstory, and by little I mean essentially my whole life. I'm going to try to keep it as brief as possible while still giving good context. Over the past decade-ish, no less than a decade really, I've been very intentional about my personal finance and just decisions that I've made along the way. But I think it's also good to have an understanding of why people spend money the way that they do and just what you were around as a child to inform and influence the decisions that you make as an adult. So I won't get super deep into that today, but I will share a little bit about my upbringing and how that's led me to where I am today. But before we get into this video, I need to make a disclaimer that this video is not about my relationships or my family or anything like that. There are going to be parts of this story that make it seem like it's about my relationships or something like that, but it really is not. I have spent all of my 20s, the majority of my 20s, being in long-term relationships. I'm 27 now, and I have spent the majority of my 20s being in long-term relationships. I get it. Boo, boo, tomato, tomato, tomato. I'm throwing tomatoes. I get it. I know. I was there. But the reason I say all this is because my relationships with my family and men that I was in relationships with at the time all affect my journey. And it was heavily influential. But this is not about these people, so I will not be sharing any names. If any of you ever see this, it's no offense to you. Anyway, let's get into it. So to give a little backstory in terms of early childhood, I lived in my grandmother's home up until I was, I think, almost 5 years old. I lived with my grandmother, my mother, and my older brother, and I saw my mom working really hard and also going to school. My grandma worked very hard and still works hard to this day at 75 years old. We also had amazing extended family who helped support my brother and I, whether it was watching us or whatever, but I grew up seeing a lot of really hardworking people. But the house that I was immediately growing up in, there was not a lot of money, but we were very loved, and we also never went without anything. We saw people working really hard and a lot of times for very little monetary reward, but that's just kind of what we saw. So then to jump ahead to around 5 years old, my parents got married, and I was raised from 5 years old to 18 years old in a military household. So there was steady income and predictability and benefits and all that good stuff. So shout out to my dad. Growing up, my parents didn't share a lot personally, like about their personal finances. If they were struggling or anything like that, they didn't really bring us into those kind of conversations. But they did teach us financial literacy. And I was raised in a house where when we got into high school and we were old enough to work, my parents had this rule that you either had to join a club, a sport, or go to work. I had no interest in joining a club. I'm terrible at sports, so I went to work. I started working at 15 years old, so that would have been in 2013 was when I got my first job at Taco Bell. My older brother helped me get that job. He had already been working there for probably a year. And when I started that job, I was making $7.25. That was the minimum wage at the time. Don't know if that's still the case. But I worked there for about 2 years. And when I first got hired, because I was only 15, there was some labor law that said that I couldn't work past 7 p.m., I want to say. So at first, the first several months of me working there, I was a little restricted in terms of how many hours I could work. But basically, once I turned 16, I mean, for the fact that I was going to high school full time, I was also working a lot. Like, I was there right after school, working until 9 or 10 p.m. I was always working on Saturdays and Sundays, like a full 8-hour shift. And so, yeah, I started working really early on. And I don't know if back then I was being super diligent about my budgeting. I want to say I was, though. I really think that I had a budgeting journal back then too, but I don't think my parents were super strict on me about how I was spending my money. They were the type of people to speak up if they felt like you were spending too much or something like that, but they didn't really get on me about budgeting. I just think that was something that I knew I needed to do. And so when I was working at Taco Bell, you would pretty much every weekend after work catch me going and shopping with my friends. We would be at Sephora, Ulta, Victoria's Secret. We had an addiction to eating Panera bread. So I would be there every weekend. That is where a decent, that's where some of my money was going. But for the most part, I was really saving everything else. I had to pay for my phone bill, but other than that, I was just kind of hanging out with my friends, but also saving and being pretty diligent about that. So then after 2 years, my father was reassigned to a new duty station, which was Texas, and I had to live in Texas for my senior year of high school. So instead of staying in food service, I decided, let me try something else instead. So when we got to my dad's next duty station, I noticed that Best Buy was having open interviews. And so through the open interviews, I got hired right away, I think. And when I got to Best Buy, I think that was a step up in pay. I know that when I was at Taco Bell, I started at $7.25 an hour, but I'm sure that raised a little bit over time. I'm sure it wasn't much whatsoever, but I think it was a little something. But either way, I tried to go back before recording this video to try to find like receipts of pay stubs and things like that. So I'm giving estimates here, but hopefully they're pretty close to accurate. But basically my next job was Best Buy, where I worked for another 2 years. I did my full senior year of high school, and then I did my first year at college. When I was working at the Best Buy in Texas, the city I moved to was so boring that, how I mentioned before, when I was working at Taco Bell and I would like go spend money with my friends on the weekends, I don't think I was doing that when I was in Texas. There was nothing to do, so I feel like there was nothing to spend my money on. And by the time I was living in Texas, I was also really intentionally trying to save for college anyway, because I knew I'd be going off to college soon. So I think that spending got a little bit more under control. And I was never out of control in the first place. Seriously, I was saving money. We'll get to that. I don't think I mentioned it before, but I was originally living in Colorado when I was working at Taco Bell. So when I left for a year to go to Texas and it was time for me to go to college, I decided to go to university in Colorado because that's where I was familiar, and because I had actually been doing long distance from the time that I left Colorado all the way up to when I was starting college. So I did long distance with my boyfriend at that time for a year. And so I wanted to move back to Colorado. My brother was there, my boyfriend was there, my friends were there. That's where I felt familiar, so I went back. When I started college, this was August 2016, and at that point I did transfer Best Buy locations. So that's when I continued working there from, again, senior year of high school to freshman year of college. I just transferred over to a location in Colorado, and I was initially working 32 to 35 hours a week, I want to say. I can't remember how much money I started making when I transitioned over to that Best Buy. I want to say it was maybe a little bit more, but either way, I did find a pay stub earlier that said I was making $9 an hour at Best Buy. That's nuts. So I do know that $9 at some point was how much I was making at Best Buy, either at the first location or the second location. But just due to internal changes, my hours started going down significantly over time, and we'll get into that a little bit more later. But that job just didn't end up being stable. I was trying to make money while being in school, and my hours were getting cut like crazy. But during my first semester of college, I had to live in the dorms, which I hated. It was horrible, and I knew I wouldn't like it, but it was my only option at the time. And my dad was able to let me use some of his GI Bill for my first semester of school. So my dorm was covered, my tuition was covered, and that was great. After that semester ended, my parents' best friends graciously let me move into their basement, so I no longer had to be in the dorms, and the GI Bill wasn't paying for the dorm anymore after that anyway, so it was good for me to get out because the dorm was the same, if not more expensive than my tuition. Now we're in December 2016. That's when I moved out of the dorm and into the basement. And at this time, as I mentioned before, and this is why me mentioning the boyfriend is relevant, because we're gonna get into this part of the story. And for the sake of not using names, we're gonna call him door number one. So after living with my parents' best friends for a few months, like I said, I moved in December of 2016, but by April 2017, door number one and I moved into an apartment together, which was a horrible idea. Mainly because I knew it wasn't a good idea and I didn't want to, and I was in a stable home environment, but being young, struggling to say no, and also not wanting to feel like I was overstaying my welcome at our friend's home. It was nothing that they ever said or did that made me feel that way. I just knew that they were really doing me a really big favor, and my parents, and so much so to the point where my mom's best friend that I was living with got door number one a job at an apartment complex. And that is what sparked this great idea for us to move in together, because he would be getting, I believe, 20% off the cost of rent. And so that brought the rent to $971 a month, I believe. So against my better judgment, I moved in with him. It was something that I could tell he really wanted. He wasn't really happy in his living situation anymore, and I had no good reason to move with him because I was paying virtually nothing. Maybe I was paying them utilities to live in their basement, but I really had no good reason to move out. But I did. And door number one is a 50-50 kind of guy. And I'm not judging a 50-50 situation. My hot take is that sometimes 50-50 situations can be great if equitable, and that means that genuinely both people are thriving as a result of the 50-50, then I love it. But, and this is nothing against door number one, but it was not equitable. There was no reason why we should have been doing 50-50, and I'll get into why. By this point, my hours at Best Buy had been cut to like 8 hours a week. And during this same time when we were about to move, again, my mom's best friend, they have great friends. I'm so grateful for them. They are such a huge contributor to where I'm at today. But she so graciously, again, helped me get a job with a position on one of the military bases in Colorado. I can't remember how much door number one was making at the time, but I think I got hired on making $10.75 an hour working on base. And I was working with kids at the time, so I was out of school on summer break, and they were also out of school on summer break. So I was able to work 40-hour work weeks with the kids during the summer to help try to build up my money. But again, don't remember how much door number one was making, but because I moved into that apartment, I lived very far away from my job. It was at least 30 minutes probably. So that was taxing on my gas every day going to and from work. I was working Monday through Friday. My car was also terrible and it was always in the shop. That was costing me so much money. And again, we're going 50-50, but I was in school or had school expenses that needed to be paid for. He did not. He lived there. He did not have to drive anywhere to get around or have that additional cost. And so he was really coming out on top in this situation. So reality check, had I just stayed in our family friend's basement, I would not have blown as much money as I did. And for context, when I got to college from working at Taco Bell and at Best Buy, even with the very minuscule amount of hourly wage that I had saved up around $10,000. So this was through working, this was through if I got money for my birthday, all that kind of stuff. I was saving it up as best I could. Now, I do want to say that he did not make me do anything. While this is something that he wanted and was pretty adamant about, at least from what I remember. That's how I remember it. Maybe I remember it wrong. But he did not make me do anything. I did not stick up for my situation and say, I can't do this. I might have said I can't do it while we were already in the midst of it, but I should have never gotten into it in the first place, and I knew that, and I didn't listen to my gut. And at the end of my freshman year, like I mentioned, I had used the GI Bill for the first semester of school, but I didn't think I was going to get to use it for the second semester. But the VA said that it would be also covered for the second semester. So I was like, wow, that's incredible. Amazing. But tell me why. I am at the end of the semester. I've already moved in with door number one. I am literally sitting at my desk studying for finals when I get an email or a phone call or something from my school saying that I owed them, I think, a little over $5,000 for my semester. They said that the VA never actually covered it, and for some reason they weren't reaching out to tell me this until the end of the semester when I had literally already taken the classes. And they told me that I could not re-enroll in more classes until I paid off that balance or got onto a payment plan. And thank God I was not in the dorms for that second semester, because that would have just doubled the amount that I owed. And by the grace of God, I was able to call on a family member who was able to help me at the time with some of that balance. But as they were trying to pull out the money from their accounts, I had to pay something. And so I paid anywhere from $1,000 to $1,500 before my family member was able to help cover the rest. So between rent, my bills, gas, grocery, car repairs, and now that added expense from the school, I was being drained. My savings account was being drained, and it was so disheartening every single month to see something that I feel like I worked so hard for was literally just vanishing in front of my eyes every single month. So honestly, thank God I even had savings at all. Otherwise, that would have ended up all probably just being credit card debt. So even though I was draining that savings, I am very, very glad that I had it. Save early and save as much as you can, because you genuinely never know when you're going to need it. But obviously, it was disheartening to have to spend my savings on those types of things when I didn't need to. I already had a stable and secure environment that I could live in. And inevitably, my relationship with door number one came to a close. We moved in together April of 2017, and I moved out around July or August. But even when I moved out, I still wasn't upfront with my parents about what was going on. So I moved in with a friend and then did not tell my mom what I had been going through, the money situation, my living situation, until October of 2017. My pride was a huge issue and sometimes still is. But back then, I would not have been willing to tell my parents that I was wrong and that I should have never moved in with him because they knew I should have never moved in with him. But I just wasn't willing to say that. And so I just drained a lot more money than necessary by not being honest. And by the time I left that situation, I probably had maybe a little over $2,000 in savings left. So to go from like around $10,000 to $2,000 something dollars in less than a year is insanity. At least it felt like that to me. When I finally told my mom in October 2017 what I was going through, she reached back out to our family friends. And once again, they came through for me when they did not have to do that at all. I am not their child. I am not their responsibility. Even their own kids weren't living in the house. And yet, there I was again. And again, I paid nothing in rent. I might have paid a little bit of utilities, and that's all. So they really created a safe, stable place where I could keep going to school, try to keep saving again, and put everything in the past behind me. But then, of course, as I do, I got into another relationship. We'll call him door number 2. And of course, door number 2 and I moved in together. But we didn't move in together until December of 2018. So we really spent that time working on our finances, and I just worked on continuing to save and trying to get to a good place until we felt comfortable to be able to move out and get in an apartment. Now, when door number 2 and I lived together, he was not a 50-50 kind of man. He really took a lot of our rent on his back. That's not to say that I didn't help with rent, but he really took the heavy lift of that, and I more so took on the other expenses like groceries, utilities, internet, things like that to sort of make up for it in certain areas and my other bills. But I still wouldn't call that 50-50 because he had all of his bills and rent. So I think he was definitely paying more in the long run, which was more equitable. He didn't have to do that, but he did, and it was really kind, and that also helped me continue to save. But eventually that relationship also came to an end, which meant there were going to be a lot of financial changes again after we had pretty much gotten ourselves really stable, which was quite unfortunate. But at the end of the day, sometimes you just have to do what you have to do. Even if that means that there's going to be a financial consequence, you really just kind of have to weigh that for yourself and your own circumstances. But in my case, it was just time to go. So that meant taking on more burden and responsibilities of more bills, more expenses. And at the time when I was considering leaving the relationship, I had a coworker who I knew was looking for a roommate and was actively interviewing people. So I went to her and just inquired, and she agreed right away, was again so kind, so gracious. Again, I could not have done this journey without people taking me in, being kind. She was planning on charging whoever was going to move in a little bit more money because the room that was vacant was a little bit larger, but because I was moving in and she really felt for me in my situation, she let us go 50-50. This is a 50-50 situation that really worked in my favor. I ultimately lived in that apartment with her from August 2020 to June 2021, which is when I moved to Austin, Texas, where I am today. And thankfully, she moved with me and is one of my best friends to this day. But the cost of starting over was not cheap. Moving out of my apartment with door number 2 brought on some credit card debt, and moving from Colorado to Austin also brought on credit card debt. I've always been really good about paying off my credit card. I have had a credit card since I was 18 years old and have been working on building my credit. But during that time of moving and things changing, me having to furnish a new place, those things were adding up, and I was not making a whole lot of money. I wasn't making any more than probably $15.50 an hour. Sometimes I was working full time. During the summers I worked full time, but any other time I was working probably like 25 hours a week or something. This is when I noticed that it was really hard for me to pay my credit card down. I had never dealt with something like that before. I always paid my credit card off every month, so I never dealt with late fees or interest or anything like that. And this is the first time that I started having a bit of a taste of that, which was unfortunate, to the point where I thought somebody was charging my card fraudulently, because I was like, why does this balance keep going up and up and up? It's because I was being charged interest. But at the time when tax season was rolling around, both in 2021 and I believe 2022, I was deliberate about using my tax return to go towards my credit card to pay that down as much as possible. But anyway, back to my best friend and I moving to Austin. When I came here, I made sure that I had my big girl job in order. I did not just leave Colorado without having something lined up here. I did, however, work for a nonprofit in the human service sector, making $18.50 an hour when I started. Initially, when we moved out here, our rent was $1,725, and we split that in half. And then when we renewed after 15 months, our rent went up to $2,025. It went up $300, so that added an additional $150 to each of our plates. So we were each paying a little over $1,000 for our base rent, which was a lot, but also we knew that if we moved out and just chose to go our separate ways at that time, it would have been even more expensive. But eventually in December 2023, it was time for us to go our separate ways after living together for years at that point. I had never lived on my own, and I really wanted to have that experience. Again, up to that point, I had been living with boyfriends and roommates, and I just wanted to know that I was able to have that experience on my own, and really to prove to myself that I could do it, because I always thought that I would need someone else to be able to achieve having my own space and having stability, and that wound up not being true. When I moved into my apartment in December of 2023, my base rent was $1,195. Mind you, at this point, I had been working at the original job still for several years. In total, I worked there for almost 3 years. And by the time I left, I was no longer making that $18.50 I started out with. I had gotten promoted to being a team lead. So when I left that job, I was making around $60K. So I felt comfortable at that point to be able to take on the expense of living alone. And then in April 2024, I actually got a new job and changed careers entirely, and that is where I'm at currently. And the pay stayed the same. I was also making $60,000 when I got started at this job, but it was an opportunity for me to get into something new and really challenge myself and push myself, and just to get to experience a new environment outside of what I got my degree in. And as of January 2025, so about 6 months ago, I received an additional raise after being at the company for a little less than a year, of a $20,000 increase, which brought me to $80,000 annually. And that is where I'm sitting right now at my current 9-to-5. So a very large jump. A lot of things have changed from my very humble beginnings, making $7.25 at Taco Bell, to where I am now, making $80,000. I really would never have imagined that. I know that might sound silly to some people, but every day it matters to me. Every day I feel grateful for that, because I genuinely did not think that I would be blessed with that, especially being so young. for me to start making $80,000 before I even turned 27 was insane to me. And it still blows my mind today because I know that that's just not the scenario for everybody. And I feel beyond grateful that I get to say that and experience it and enjoy my home where I feel safe and stable and secure. And all that to say, I'm now in a place where I can save and I can invest and I'm not in credit card debt. And that feels very incredible. And I know that part of that is because even throughout all of the ups and downs of my journey, one thing that I never stopped doing was budgeting. I made sure every time I got paid, I have multiple budgeting journals that are dated that show that I have been doing this for years because I always wanted to know, even if I'm in a bad spot financially, I want to know where I'm at. It's just really, really cool to be able to see that progression. And I want to be able to see that through this channel as well. It's going to be sort of a video diary where I get to see where I'm at now to how much things change in the years to come. When I was working on base with the kids, I was barely making any money at the time, as we know. I had the opportunity to invest in a matched 401k. I can't remember how high the match was that they allowed for, but I did not have money. I was living with door number one. I did not have money to be investing. And luckily, there was someone who was a little bit older than me, who was my team lead, who at the time just told me, just invest 1%. You won't feel 1% come out of your paycheck. Just invest 1%. So I did that, even though I thought it was stupid. And I did the 1-to-1 match. While I was at the nonprofit, I also invested a little bit, not much. I was offered a 403b, so I put $50 of each paycheck into that, so that would have been $100 a month. Again, had no idea where that was going. And I found out that my employer had been putting in to my 401k. They didn't do a 401k match, but they would put in money every month. But I just really didn't think about it that much. It was just a benefit of me working at that company. And even though I thought that the portions of money that I was investing was small and insignificant, which it sort of was, when I checked my investments and finally hunted them down, I am sitting at $11,029.73. Let that be a lesson that even when you think that your contribution is tiny and insignificant, it is helping you. It truly is. I heard people say that so many times and I didn't believe them. I don't think I understood how compound interest works, but it was so exciting to know that I don't have to start from zero. So even if you don't make that much money now, I would highly recommend investing just a little bit, a teeny tiny amount, because you never know how that will help you years down the road. Also, we didn't touch on credit scores or anything like that in this video, but I got my first credit card when I was 18 years old and have always been working on building up my credit. For a long time, my credit score was sitting around a 750, but as of recently, I found that that is now at an 827, which is really exciting. I also want to touch on my student debt a little bit. I was extremely fortunate to have parents that could help me with my tuition. Again, I used the VA loan for my first semester. The second semester, I had help from a relative when I got hit with that random bill. Then I believe the following year, my mom forgot to fill out her portion of the FAFSA. So when she didn't do that, I was then not offered anything in financial aid. And so her and my dad came out of pocket to fund my tuition that year to make sure that I didn't drop out, because I offered to drop out. And for anyone who's unfamiliar with the FAFSA, when you are filling that out to receive financial aid, I have to put my information. And even though I was no longer living with my parents, I moved out of my parents' home when I was 18, I still had to include them on my FAFSA, including their income. And so that made it really hard for me to get financial aid. So what we would do was I would take out everything that I could from financial aid, and the remainder would be paid by my parents, again, to make sure that I stayed in school. So that is phenomenal on their part, and I know that not everyone can do that for their children. So I am still grateful to this day that I got to graduate on time and that they really supported me in that, because if that happened to someone else, I fully recognize that they would have to drop out and leave school. So if you take anything from this video, when it comes to the negative parts of my journey, I want you to keep in mind that, especially if it's involving your finances, don't get involved in things that you have no business getting involved in, that are not necessary, that you don't feel confident making a decision about. It's okay to wait on things. You don't have to feel like you need to keep up with the Joneses. You don't feel like you need to move in with boyfriends in an effort to keep your life afloat. There are other ways. But as for the positives, I would say that I've maintained some sort of stability in my life, especially lately, and that I've cared and been thoughtful about my finances and didn't just throw in the towel when I thought that it was impossible to get to this point. Even when it came to my credit card debt, if I would have told myself that the debt was no big deal, or that it wasn't that much at the time, and didn't prioritize paying it down, it would have been so much worse than what it was. I probably had a couple $1,000s of credit card debt that was accruing interest, and that was coming out to a little over $30 a month. So I know someone might think, oh, that's not that much, but if I would have let that get out of control, it would have been so much worse. So if you are still here, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you sticking it out all the way through to the end. That is enough about me for now. Next week, we will be getting into what my monthly budget breakdown looks like. But yeah, I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of context as to how I got to where I am today. But next week, we'll start diving into what those numbers look like a little bit more. Thank you so much again for being here, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.